Before there was sound, there was only stillness. Not the kind of silence we know, the soft hush between two breaths or the quiet of a sleeping forest, but an absolute absence, a universe without a listener or a song. In that beginning, nothing moved fast enough to make a wave. There were no lungs to exhale, no winds to wander, no surfaces to tremble. It was a world before vibration, before any echo could exist. The cosmos held its breath, suspended in the perfect calm of creation's waiting room. The only motion was light itself, and even light, without something to touch, seemed lonely in its brilliance. Silence in those ancient eons was not emptiness, but potential, an infinite pause pregnant with the possibility of music. It was a kind of quiet that carried the blueprint of every sound that would one day be born. If one could have drifted through that space, there would have been no noise, no heartbeat, only the delicate pulse of expanding time. Every atom slept in stillness, unaware that one day, their restless dance would give rise to the chorus of existence. The silence before sound was not void, it was the breath held by the universe before its first sigh. Some physicists say the early universe rang with a low, cosmic hum, a microwave echo, a residue of creation itself. Yet even that hum was beyond the reach of any ear. There were no instruments to perceive it, no minds to name it. The waves passed endlessly through dark matter and dust, whispering in languages that would take billions of years to translate. Silence, in truth, is not the absence of sound, but the absence of awareness. Without an observer, even the loudest explosion is only motion, unnoticed, unmeasured, unrealized. The universe's first act of sound was therefore an act of becoming known. As stars began to form, fusion ignited in their cores, and energy flared across the dark sea. The first sounds were not like those of wind or voice, but the slow, seismic pressure of cosmic birth. These were the deep, inaudible rumbles of gas collapsing into light, frequencies so vast that no ear could capture them. It was a symphony beyond human comprehension, a music of gravity and radiation, of atoms colliding and becoming something more. If we could somehow hear it now, it might sound like a single endless note, reverberating through eternity. Yet on Earth, long before that note found its harmony, the silence was heavier. Our young planet spun in its molten infancy, cloaked in magma and chaos, but even chaos then had no song. There was no air to carry sound, no wind to sing through craters, no rain to patter upon stone. Everything that moved did so in mute fury. The collisions that shaped continents and seas were thunder without a medium. Silence was everywhere, not as peace, but as inevitability, the soundless labor of creation itself. Still, something profound lived within that stillness. In the absence of sound, rhythm already existed. The planet's rotation, the beating of its molten heart, the pull of gravity, each was a kind of unspoken cadence. Sound, after all, is only vibration in air, but vibration existed from the start. The silence of early Earth was not dead, only waiting for a listener. It was the still pause before a melody, the drawn breath before the first word. And so, in this vast and endless quiet, the seeds of music began to form. Every potential note, every possible sound, lay folded within the atoms of this waiting world. The silence before sound was the origin of wonder, the moment before everything found a way to speak. It is here that our story begins, in a universe that did not yet know its own voice, resting in the timeless calm before the wind learned to sing. The earth was young then, restless, molten, and wrapped in a thin veil of vapor. It did not yet have a sky, only the haze of gases rising from its wounded crust, spiraling into the void like sighs from a sleeping giant. The planet's heart beat hot and heavy, its surface cracked and seething. Volcanoes were the architects of the future atmosphere, exhaling carbon dioxide, nitrogen, sulfur, and steam into the emptiness above. With every eruption, the Earth exhaled a little more, and in time, that exhalation became its breath. The planet, for the first time, began to breathe in a way that could carry sound. Before that breath, vibration was trapped, energy without a medium, motion without resonance. Sound is not merely noise, it is the journey of a wave through something capable of carrying it. Without air, there is only silence, for the universe does not allow sound to move in a vacuum. As the Earth's gases thickened and cooled, that silence began to loosen. Molecules collided, rebounded, and connected. The first winds stirred across a surface still too hot to host oceans, whispering over stone and flame. Those early breezes were not gentle, they were wild, heavy with ash and lightning, but they marked the beginning of something profound. The birth of an atmosphere meant the birth of possibility, the creation of a space where sound could live. Over countless millennia, the chaos softened. Rain began to fall for the first time, each droplet hissing as it met molten rock, releasing plumes of steam that rose to join the forming sky. Water cooled the planet's skin, and in doing so, transformed the nature of its breath. The sky thickened with clouds, layers of air folding upon one another like gauze. The wind began to move differently, less a scream, more a sigh. In those shifting currents, the raw materials of life and sound intertwined. The planet's exhale was no longer just chemical, it had rhythm. To imagine this time is to picture a world where the air itself was being born. The gases that would one day fill our lungs were learning how to exist together, oxygen, nitrogen, and carbon mingling in a delicate balance. The sky was finding its voice, though no one yet existed to hear it. In that breath was a hidden intelligence, the slow physics of balance and exchange. Air is not merely invisible matter, it is the silent thread that binds all living things, the bridge between motion and meaning. The birth of the atmosphere was the moment when the Earth began to prepare for music, not through design, but through inevitability. The first true wind was perhaps not a sound we could ever imagine. It was the groan of pressure over heat, the slow whisper of gases shifting in temperature and density. It moved across the plains of a lifeless world, carving invisible paths between mountains of cooling rock. That wind was the beginning of expression, the moment when the planet learned to speak, however faintly. For sound is born not from objects, but from relationships, from air meeting matter, from motion meeting resistance. The Earth had found its partner in the sky, and together they began to compose the first unintentional melody. Scientists say that the formation of Earth's atmosphere took hundreds of millions of years. It began with volcanic degassing, continued through cometary delivery of water and carbon, and evolved as the planet cooled. But beyond the chemistry, there is something almost spiritual in the thought that our entire world was once mute. Every bird call, every whisper, every wave crashing on a shore owes its existence to that ancient process of breath. The same air that once flowed through volcanic plumes now moves through our lungs. We are breathing the memory of Earth's first exhalation. As the atmosphere stabilized, sunlight scattered across its layers, painting the world in soft blues and golds. The planet's body began to cool beneath the caress of its own breath, and the air above started to hum with quiet movement. It was no longer a violent storm but a living rhythm, a constant exchange of warmth and motion. For the first time, sound could travel, small, fragile, fleeting vibrations carried on the wind. The world had created its own medium of connection. And so, in that sacred transition, the Earth transformed from a silent sphere of stone to a breathing world of sound. The breath of the planet became the mother of music, the invisible ocean through which every future voice would one day flow. From this moment on, silence would never again be absolute. The wind had learned to move, and in moving, it had given the universe its first whisper, a promise of the songs still to come. When the wind first began to move, the Earth shuddered with a sound that had never existed before. It was not a song in any human sense, no melody, no rhythm, but a raw vibration born from motion itself. Across plains of cooling basalt and oceans still forming in their basins, the newborn air surged and fell, pushing against stone, carrying dust, whispering through the jagged mouths of mountains. It was the planet's first attempt at voice, a vast, unshaped murmur that filled the silence left by creation. The wind, newly awakened, began to speak in the only language it knew, movement. At first, it was violent, a storm without purpose. The air, heavy with heat and volcanic gases, roared over molten fields and through canyons carved by fire. Each gust was a collision of pressure and temperature, each wave of motion a new experiment in resonance. When air meets matter, sound is born, and so the young Earth began to hum. The hissing of steam vents, the crash of meteor impacts, the booming roll of thunder from electrical storms that split the sky, all these were the first notes of a planet testing its lungs. The world had begun to find its timbre, deep and primal, an orchestra of elements without conductor or audience. As the surface cooled, the air's tone softened. Winds that once screamed now sighed across the dark stone, carrying fine particles of ash like memories drifting from one horizon to the next. In the valleys between mountains, echoes began to form, reflections of sound that hinted at rhythm, repetition, and pattern. The atmosphere was learning to play with itself, discovering the subtle art of echo and delay. Every sound born in those days carried a fragment of the planet's youth: the hiss of evaporating rain, the moan of shifting rock, the gentle drone of air flowing through fissures in the crust. Together, they wove an elemental symphony, the sound of matter learning how to move through time. The first song of the wind was also the first expression of relationship. Sound cannot exist alone. It requires resistance, something to push against. The wind found that resistance in the shape of the earth, the ridges, craters, and cliffs that sculpted its motion into tone. Over millions of years, the duet between air and landscape became the defining music of the world. Each mountain range created its own harmony, each valley its own resonance. To imagine this is to picture a world still empty of life but already filled with sound, a voice without a listener, a melody played to the void. Scientists can recreate the conditions of that early Earth, and in doing so, they can hear what those primitive winds might have sounded like. The frequencies would have been low and haunting, shaped by dense, hot air and vast open terrain. They might have echoed like the breath of a giant, slow and endless, rolling across oceans of cooling rock. The physics is simple yet profound. Sound waves are nothing more than pressure changes in a fluid, but in those changes lies a kind of soul. When the first gusts swept across the planet, they carried within them the origin of every word, every song, every heartbeat that would ever exist. And so the wind continued, restless and eternal. As rain began to fall in earnest and oceans gathered in their cradles, the air learned to mingle with water. The soundscape deepened, droplets pattering against stone, waves breaking along primitive shores, thunder rolling through vaporous skies. The wind had found its companions, and the planet's song grew layered and rich. It was the first time that Earth truly sang, a continuous, evolving hymn of air, water, and fire. To the modern mind, these early sounds might seem chaotic, but they were the purest form of order, nature's first experiment in harmony. In every gust and rumble was a story of temperature, density, and movement. Every vibration carried the memory of change. The world, though empty of life, was already alive in sound. The wind's breath became the pulse of the planet, its whisper the first bridge between silence and meaning. If one could stand on that ancient shore and listen, the experience would not be peaceful but awe-inspiring. The roar of creation, the endless song of wind across stone, would fill the senses with something beyond comprehension. It was the voice of a world just beginning to know itself, shaping sound from chaos and silence alike. The wind had found its rhythm, and in that rhythm, it began to teach the earth how to sing. And so the first true song of the planet was not made by creatures or intention, but by the meeting of air and motion, an accident of physics that became the foundation of emotion. Every future tone, from the chirp of birds to the murmur of human speech, would trace its lineage back to that moment. The wind had learned to sing, and in doing so, it gave the universe its first living sound, the echo of a world discovering its voice. In time, the heat softened, and the planet's surface calmed enough for rain to stay. Droplet by droplet, water gathered into pools, then lakes, then vast oceans that swallowed continents and cooled the fiery crust. What had once been a world of flame turned blue, and with that transformation came a new kind of sound. The wind had learned to sing, but now, water began to listen. The ocean became Earth's great resonant chamber, its endless body of liquid capturing and transforming every vibration that entered it. In this vast, fluid silence, sound found depth for the first time. Sound behaves differently in water. It travels faster, farther, and deeper, its waves bending and echoing through the liquid darkness. The first sounds within those early seas were not melodies, but elemental murmurs, the hiss of rain striking the surface, the rumble of shifting tectonic plates beneath, the fizz of gas bubbles escaping from vents in the ocean floor. The world below was alive with motion, though no life yet swam through it. The ocean itself was the listener, the absorber, the keeper of sound. Where the air allowed echoes to fade, water preserved them, holding each note longer, letting it ripple into eternity. Imagine the depths then, black, pressurized, without witness. Hydrothermal vents exhaled mineral-rich plumes into the darkness, releasing a constant hum of energy. Each bubble that burst from the seafloor made a tiny percussion, a beat against the great silence. When these bursts combined, they formed patterns, natural rhythms of expansion and collapse, a slow drumming that might have been the earliest heartbeat of the planet. It was here, in the womb of water, that vibration began to organize itself into harmony. The ocean's body became both stage and instrument, a resonant shell amplifying the songs of rock, steam, and temperature. Though we cannot hear them directly, scientists can simulate those primordial sounds, the low thrum of underwater tremors, the gurgle of vents, the deep resonance of waves colliding in confined basins. To human ears, they might resemble the distant notes of a cello or the whisper of wind through a cavern. But to the planet, these were not noises, they were communication, the expression of energy through density. The water listened by carrying every wave, every pulse, without judgment or interruption. It became the perfect medium for connection. Over eons, as the ocean stabilized and sunlight reached their shallows, new kinds of sound emerged. Raindrops striking the surface became a constant rhythm, while underwater currents brushed against rock and sand, creating faint, rolling tones. Even in the absence of life, these natural vibrations filled the marine world with texture. The ocean had learned to respond. Each change in temperature, each swirl of current, altered the way sound moved, stretching it, bending it, transforming it into new harmonies. The sea, once a silent mirror, became a vast acoustic network linking the planet's interior to its surface. To this day, sound travels through water almost 5 times faster than through air, and it carries over immense distances. This property made the ocean the first true archive of Earth's sonic memory. Every movement, every quake, every drop of rain was recorded in waves and vibrations. Before the appearance of life, the planet had already composed symphonies of motion. The water's depths echoed with them, unseen but eternal, a song written without language or listener. The beauty of this moment in Earth's history lies in its paradox. The oceans were utterly lifeless. No fish, no coral, no whales, but they already contained the perfect medium for hearing. The stage was set long before the actors arrived. Sound and silence existed together in perfect balance, the calm expanse above, the murmuring heart below. The planet had become a place where sound could evolve, where one day a voice might emerge not just from wind or rock, but from life itself. And so, the water learned patience. It carried the wind's song across its surface and softened it, turning roar into whisper, chaos into rhythm. It held the memory of thunder and the sighs of rain, preserving them in liquid resonance. Beneath those waters, the seeds of hearing were already being planted in the language of vibration. This was the age when the Earth first began to harmonize with itself, the atmosphere and the ocean conversing in tones too deep for human perception. The wind sang and the water replied. Together they formed the earliest duet in the story of the planet's voice. In their union, silence was no longer emptiness. It had become the space between breaths, the pause between waves. From this meeting of air and sea, the foundation for all future music was laid. Every ripple, every hum, every distant echo was a rehearsal for the day when living things would rise from the deep and learn to sing the ocean's ancient song. Then came the faint stirring of life, small, fragile, and almost silent. The planet, long a theater of wind and wave, began to grow restless beneath its surface. In the warm shallows of ancient seas, chemistry learned how to remember itself. Molecules joined hands, forming chains that could replicate, protect, and adapt. From that quiet alchemy, the first living cells emerged. They were microscopic, translucent, and unaware of the miracle they represented. And yet, with their movement, the world's silence began to fracture. For every twitch of a flagellum, every bubble of oxygen released, created a vibration, a whisper in the water that was, in essence, sound. Life had begun to make noise. At first, these were sounds without intention. The creak of microbial mats shifting beneath the tide, the popping of gases from photosynthetic colonies, the soft rustle of currents stirred by primitive movement. These were not songs, not communication, but side effects of existence, tiny ripples of motion woven into the ocean's fabric. Still, they marked a threshold. Until this moment, every sound had come from the inanimate world, from pressure and temperature. Now, for the first time, sound carried the signature of life itself. The planet's voice was no longer a purely physical echo. It had become biological. Imagine that alien sea, a vast, blue wilderness alive with invisible motion. Light shimmered in golden threads across the shallows, touching colonies of cyanobacteria that exhaled oxygen in slow, bubbling rhythm. Each bubble's release was a pulse, a beat in an ancient song of respiration. Beneath them, mats of organic film shifted and sighed as currents brushed over their surface. Every sound was microscopic, yet together they formed an unending chorus, the quiet pulse of life discovering how to move through the world. Sound, at its essence, is vibration given purpose by pattern. And life, even at its simplest, is pattern made flesh. These early organisms didn't yet know communication, but their motions created accidental language. A sudden burst of bubbles might signal chemical imbalance. A collective sway of filaments might alter local current. Though they had no ears, they responded to vibration, sensing the tremors of their environment through their membranes. In this way, life began to listen long before it could hear. The first dialogue on Earth was not spoken, it was felt. Over time, evolution refined this sensitivity. Cells that could detect vibrations survived longer, adapting their behavior to the rhythms of their surroundings. Sensitivity became perception, and perception, one day, would become awareness. The origins of hearing lie not in ears, but in these ancient vibrations, pressure and touch, movement and response. Every creature that would one day sing or listen owed its ability to this first communion between life and motion. Above the waves, the wind continued its eternal song, unaware that beneath it, the sea was learning to answer. Sound was no longer the domain of the elements. It now belonged to something alive, something that could change and remember. With every chemical flicker and cellular pulse, the oceans became richer in complexity. The earth was no longer a passive stage for sound, it was becoming a composer. The planet's voice, once shaped only by air and water, now included the faint murmur of life itself. Scientists have found evidence of these ancient bacterial mats in rocks more than 3.5 billion years old. Their layered structures, called stromatolites, preserve the pattern of microbial growth, ripples that resemble frozen waves. It is poetic to think of them as the first recorded music of life, movements solidified into stone, vibrations trapped in the fossil record. The sound they made is lost to time, but its rhythm remains, written in layers of mineral and memory. In the great timeline of existence, this moment was quiet, yet monumental. The world had transitioned from a symphony of elements to a living orchestra. The soundscape was still soft, bubbles, shifts, and flows, but beneath that calm was an explosion of meaning. Every vibration carried information, every ripple held consequence. Sound, once blind and aimless, had found purpose. It became the language of survival, the echo of life's persistence against silence. And so the planet's song deepened again. The wind sang above, the water echoed below, and within that liquid harmony, life began to hum. The earth, once voiceless, now breathed in rhythm with its creations. The first sounds of living things were humble, mere whispers in the tide, but they were also sacred. They were proof that matter could not only move, but feel, respond, and evolve. The silence that had once wrapped the world had finally been broken, not by thunder or stone, but by the gentle sigh of life awakening to its own existence. Sound had existed for eons, but hearing was still unborn. The world sang endlessly, the wind, the waves, the whisper of microbial life, but there were no ears to notice, no minds to interpret vibration as meaning. Yet, deep in the oceans, evolution was quietly sculpting a miracle. Life had begun to develop the ability not only to make sound but to sense it. It started not with hearing as we know it, but with touch, with the faintest perception of movement through water, the awareness of a ripple passing by. In that sensitivity, something extraordinary was awakening, the first sense of sound. Every wave of pressure that traveled through the sea was a message, though few could yet understand it. Early multicellular organisms, soft-bodied, fragile and blind, learned to feel the world through vibration. Their survival depended on it. A sudden tremor might signal a predator's approach or the shifting current that carried food. Cells began to specialize, evolving structures more responsive to motion. Cilia, tiny hair-like projections, became the first instruments of awareness, bending with the rhythm of passing waves. To bend was to feel, and to feel was the first act of listening. These primitive listeners did not have ears or nerves, but they were the ancestors of everything that would one day hear. The ocean was their teacher. It sent them messages through pressure and pattern, training them to interpret the unseen. Each vibration carried information about distance, direction, and danger. Over millions of years, this skill became invaluable. Organisms that could detect vibrations had a better chance of surviving, of knowing the world without seeing it. Evolution favored the listeners, and the sense of hearing began to take form. In fish and marine invertebrates, this awareness evolved into something more refined. Fluid-filled canals developed beneath their skin, lined with sensory hairs that could detect even the faintest shifts in water movement. This was the origin of the lateral line, a primitive ear spread across the body. It allowed creatures to hear the flow of currents, the movement of others, and the pulse of their own environment. What began as cellular trembling had become navigation, perception, even communication. The Earth's creatures were beginning to sense one another not through sight or touch, but through sound. In time, some species carried this new sense onto land. As life crawled from sea to shore, vibration found a new medium, air. The structures that once detected pressure in water adapted to the thinner, more volatile atmosphere. Cavities formed behind membranes, amplifying the faintest movement of air into meaningful signal. Bones that once helped ancient fish breathe became part of a delicate chain capable of transmitting sound. Through countless transformations, evolution shaped these parts into the first true ears. It is astonishing to consider what an ear truly is, a sculpted membrane stretched across a chamber of air, tuned to respond to the invisible tremors of the world. When vibration strikes it, it dances. Those dances are converted into signals, and signals become experience. Hearing is, in essence, touch refined to art, the skin learning to feel what cannot be seen. And with hearing came awareness of another kind, the realization that the world was not still but filled with motion, rhythm, and music. In the grand story of life, hearing was a revolution. It connected creatures not only to their surroundings but to each other. The first listeners could now respond to calls, to warnings, to songs of attraction and belonging. A new form of language emerged long before words, communication through frequency, tone, and pulse. The ocean that had once whispered to itself now hosted dialogues, exchanges of vibration that shaped survival and emotion alike. Science can trace this miracle in fossils and genetics, but its poetry lies in the implication that hearing is the planet's way of listening to itself. Through ears, the Earth became self-aware in sound. Every chirp, every whale's call, every rush of wind through leaves is an echo of that evolutionary awakening. From the trembling hairs of a single cell to the symphonies of modern creatures, the thread of listening has never been broken. Even now, within every ear, human or animal, the ocean remains. The fluid that fills our inner ear mirrors the ancient seas from which hearing was born. When sound moves through us, it is as though we return to that first awareness, feeling the pulse of life in liquid motion. The ear is a time capsule, carrying the memory of waves, of pressure, of movement through water. And so, the invention of hearing was not a moment but a gradual unfolding, a long, patient evolution from touch to tone, from vibration to voice. It was the planet's next great awakening, as if life had paused, listened carefully, and realized that it was surrounded by music. The world had always been singing, only now could it finally be heard. When the first ears awakened, the world changed forever. For the first time, sound became not just vibration, but meaning. Creatures began to move through a realm of invisible signals, calls, warnings, songs, that stitched the fabric of existence with awareness. Yet among these new listeners, one would rise to an extraordinary form of expression. The wind, the oldest voice of Earth, had found a partner in life itself. Breath entered the lungs of ancient creatures, and with that breath came the possibility of creating sound from within. It was the dawn of organic song, the moment when the planet's voice was reborn through living beings. Early amphibians and reptiles croaked, hissed, and growled, their sounds shaped by air passing through primitive throats. These were not songs as we know them but instinctive vibrations, calls of hunger, territory, or warning. Still, something profound was taking place. The same wind that once carved melodies through canyons and trees was now flowing through bodies, becoming breath, becoming tone. Life had learned to imitate the voice of its own planet. The atmosphere itself was no longer passive, it was an instrument through which creatures spoke. Insects were among the earliest masters of this new art. Their wings and legs became tools of resonance, tiny instruments playing the language of attraction, defense, and rhythm. The hum of a cicada, the chirp of a cricket, the drone of a bee, all were fragments of a growing symphony that spread across Earth's landscapes. The air began to shimmer with life's vibrations, a chorus that linked species and seasons. These were the first composers of the terrestrial orchestra, tuning the wind to their needs. Then came the age of birds, and with it, song as we know it. The evolutionary leap from simple call to structured melody reshaped the sonic identity of Earth. Birds did not just call, they created patterns, repetition, and variation, transforming instinct into art. Their syrinx, a delicate organ at the base of the windpipe, gave rise to an infinity of sounds, haunting low notes of doves, jubilant trills of wrens, and the echoing calls of eagles over mountains. Each species added a new thread to the planetary score. The air was now full of voices, each one a reflection of life's adaptation, emotion, and purpose. Sound became communication, and communication became culture. Whales developed their own dialects in the sea, wolves harmonized across valleys, frogs announced the rain before it came. Every tone carried knowledge, memory, and the pulse of existence. The planet was learning to listen to itself through countless tongues and lungs, every voice a vessel of wind reshaped by flesh. Science tells us that vocalization evolved for survival, for mating, for warning, for unity. But within that evolution lies a quiet poetry. Breath, the essence of life, became the bridge between body and atmosphere. Every call, every song, was an offering, the inner air of a living being released into the world, merging with the wind that sustains it. In this exchange, sound became the truest form of connection, a communion between the creature and the cosmos. To breathe and to sing are acts of remembrance. In each exhalation, there echoes the story of the first winds that swept across a silent earth. The lungs that inhale and exhale today are sculpted from that same air. And when a creature calls into the sky, it continues the planet's oldest ritual, the transformation of motion into music. The wind that once sang alone now sings through millions of voices, all variations of a single elemental breath. It is here that the story of sound becomes inseparable from the story of life. The atmosphere is no longer just a sea of gases but a living archive of exhaled history. Every gust, every whisper carries traces of those who came before, oxygen from ancient forests, carbon once held by the bones of creatures long vanished. To breathe is to partake in an endless exchange, a cycle of shared existence. And when sound travels through that shared breath, it becomes more than a vibration. It becomes memory made audible. The song of a bird is not just its own, It is the voice of air that has passed through generations, landscapes, and time itself. The wind that shaped mountains now passes through feathers. The same current that stirred the seas now trembles in a melody above the forest. So when the wind learned to sing, it did not do so alone. It found countless partners in the creatures it nurtured. Every sound in nature, every howl, croak, hum, and song, is a duet between air and life. Together, they wove the atmosphere into an instrument of memory. And in that union, the earth itself became a choir, breathing, vibrating, remembering, and dreaming through the endless motion of sound. Over countless millennia, the earth's song grew more intricate. The air shimmered with calls, rhythms, and resonances, each species adding its own note to the planet's unfolding composition. Yet amid this chorus, a subtle transformation was taking place. Some creatures were not merely making sound, they were beginning to shape it, to bend vibration into intention. Sound was no longer just a tool for survival, it was becoming a form of expression. It was in these quiet experiments with rhythm and resonance that the planet's first true music began to emerge. The oceans, vast and resonant, were among the first stages for this evolution. Whales and dolphins began to use sound not only to navigate the depths but to communicate across impossible distances. Their haunting songs rolled through the dark water for hundreds of miles, full of patterns, repetitions, and tonal variations, signs of learning, memory, and perhaps even emotion. To modern science, their songs are still partly a mystery, but their effect is unmistakable. The sea itself became alive with organized sound, with melodies older than any human voice. On land, the first architects of melody were the birds. Their evolution refined the planet's sense of musicality. Where the early world was filled with noise and raw energy, birds brought structure, notes, timing, and sequence. They experimented with mimicry, with variations that could attract a mate or define territory. Yet their songs were more than function. They were patterns of beauty, woven with the precision of instinct and the grace of wonder. The forests and skies began to echo not with randomness but with rhythm, each dawn becoming a concert of natural intention. Insects, too, contributed to this grand symphony. Cicadas timed their droning to the pulse of sunlight, creating cyclical harmonies that rose and fell with the heat of the day. Frogs called in unison under the weight of evening rain, their combined voices forming percussive waves that mirrored the thunder above. Even wind-blown reeds and hollowed stones joined the performance, resonating in the breath of passing air. Every living and non-living element played its part, the planet's orchestra conducted by motion, temperature, and time. As sound grew richer, so too did its meaning. A simple vibration could now carry information beyond survival. It could express emotion, alarm, longing, reassurance. A mother's call to her young, a whale's mournful echo in the deep, the tranquil cooing of doves, all carried the same undercurrent, the impulse to connect. The physics of resonance became the language of empathy. Through sound, life began to feel the presence of other lives, even without sight or touch. In this way, the earth was teaching itself communication through music. The boundaries between organism and environment blurred. A tree, when bent by the wind, sang through its hollow trunk. The rain, when striking the canopy, composed percussion against leaves. These were not coincidences but reflections of a deeper harmony, an ecological rhythm in which every vibration interacted, responded, and adapted. Science might call it acoustics, but to the planet, it was something far more profound, the emergence of unity through resonance. Even silence played a role in this evolution. The pauses between sounds allowed space for meaning to form, just as gaps in waves create rhythm. Nature's music depended on contrast, the hush before a storm, the stillness of dusk before the night insects began to play. It was through this interplay of sound and silence that the earth shaped awareness itself. Listening became as vital as speaking. Every creature that responded to a call contributed to an unbroken cycle of transmission and reception, the planet breathing through sound. Somewhere within this ancient orchestra lay the seeds of all future music. The patterns of whale songs echo in human lullabies. The intervals of birdsong reappear in our symphonies. The pulse of the ocean's tide mirrors the rhythms of our hearts. It is as if, when we create music, we are remembering something older than humanity, a memory encoded in air, in bone, in the pulse of breath. To understand the first music is to realize that it was never truly invented. It was discovered, unearthed from the vibrations already moving through the world. Before instruments, before language, before culture, the planet itself was composing. Every beat of rain on rock, every rustle of wind through the forest canopy, every creature's voice carried a fragment of the same truth. That sound was the Earth's way of dreaming aloud. And so, as the world's first songs took shape, the planet's identity deepened. The wind was no longer only movement, it was memory, melody, and connection. The ocean's depths were no longer silent, they were vast, resonant archives of shared emotion. The Earth had found a way to communicate with itself across time and space, through creatures that sang without knowing they were continuing an ancient art. The first music was not created to be heard. It was born to exist, to fill the silence between breaths, and to remind the planet that it was alive. In the slow unfolding of ancient time, there came a moment when the Earth's surface began to change once more, not in violent bursts of fire or flood, but in the quiet rhythm of movement beneath the crust. The continents, vast and restless, drifted like dreams across the mantle's molten flow. Their motion was imperceptible in a single lifetime, yet over millions of years, it sculpted the very shape of the world. Mountains rose from the sea's edge, valleys deepened where plates pulled apart. Land met land in slow collisions, pushing stone against stone, until the sky itself seemed to lift with the pressure. The Earth was not a fixed body but a living one, shifting and breathing in geologic time. What had once been endless ocean began to break apart into separate worlds, each with its own destiny. The wind watched from above, tracing the outlines of these newborn continents. It learned new ways to travel, sweeping across deserts, winding through canyons, gliding over forests that were only beginning to form. It carried dust from one land to another, connecting distant places long before rivers or routes could bridge them. The sky became the Earth's great messenger, linking every corner of the planet through invisible currents of motion. Even now, a single grain of Saharan dust can cross oceans and nourish the Amazon soil. That is the enduring conversation between air and land. The continents, meanwhile, were alive in their own way. Beneath their rocky skin, molten rivers flowed slowly, reshaping the interior of the planet. Volcanoes breathed smoke and ash into the sky, returning the fire of the underworld to the realm of air. In those dark eruptions, the Earth was exhaling, releasing the gases that would one day make life possible. Carbon, nitrogen, sulfur, and water vapor all rose together in clouds of creation. The air thickened, changed, and cooled. With every eruption, with every trembling shift, the world grew closer to balance. Then came rain, falling upon the newborn continents like a blessing. For thousands of years, it poured without end, carving paths into stone, forming rivers that wound their way toward the sea. Each drop carried minerals from the rocks it touched, feeding the oceans with nutrients that would soon sustain the first living forms. The land, once bare and silent, became alive with motion, rivers flowing, winds whispering, tides returning. Slowly, soil formed from broken rock and decayed organic matter, softening the planet's surface. From this union of earth, water, and air, the stage was set for life to flourish beyond the sea. The first plants rose timidly from the water's edge, simple green structures that clung to wet stone. They were the pioneers, pulling carbon from the air and releasing oxygen in return. Their presence transformed the atmosphere once more, turning the sky from haze to clarity. Over millions of years, forests followed, vast jungles of ferns, mosses, and towering trees that reached upward toward the light. With each breath, they exhaled the oxygen that filled the lungs of future creatures. The wind moved through their leaves, finding new music in the rustle of greenery, new harmonies in the rhythm of growth. The continents grew more defined, their boundaries marked by mountains and shorelines. Some drifted toward warmth, others into cold, creating climates that shaped the life to come. In the deep heart of Pangaea, that single, massive landmass, deserts stretched across the interior while rainforests bloomed along the coasts. Creatures began to crawl from the water, their fins reshaping into limbs. Amphibians became the Earth's first explorers, feeling the soil beneath them for the first time. And with each footstep, the air trembled softly, as if the planet itself was listening. The wind carried their scent across the continents, mingling with the breath of forests and the warmth of volcanic plains. It touched scales, feathers, and fur, learning to move differently around new forms of life. It cooled the backs of creatures basking in sunlight and carried the cry of predators through canyons. For the first time, the wind was no longer alone in its song. It shared the atmosphere with countless beating hearts. It became witness to motion in miniature, wings fluttering, leaves trembling, rivers sighing. Every part of the earth was alive, and all of it moved to the same unspoken rhythm. Through the shifting of continents and the birth of new life, the wind learned patience. It understood that change was never abrupt, that even the slowest drift of land carried purpose. Beneath the sea, tectonic plates continued their ancient dance, creating new islands and swallowing others back into the deep. Above, the sky remained vast and eternal, but its patterns changed too. New jet streams formed, new weather systems evolved. The balance between air, water, and earth was delicate, but it endured. In time, the great landmass split apart. Pangaea fractured into separate continents, each setting forth on its own path. The wind adjusted, following new routes across the expanding world. It carried the warmth of the equator toward the poles, the chill of glaciers toward the tropics. Through these movements, climates were born, monsoons, trade winds, and Arctic gales, all orchestrated by the planet's slow turning and the steady heartbeat of its molten core. And though humans were still ages away, the world was already preparing for their arrival. Every mountain ridge, every valley, every current of air was shaping the conditions they would inherit. The wind's long journey had meaning. It was sculpting a home for consciousness, a planet balanced between chaos and calm. The continents, too, were part of that design, their collisions and separations ensuring diversity, ensuring possibility. In the stillness between storms, if one could have listened closely, the earth itself might have seemed to whisper, "I am becoming." For in every drifting plate, in every gust of wind, in every shifting tide, the planet was finding its form, not as a static creation, but as an evolving symphony. The continents were its chords, the oceans its rhythm, and the atmosphere its breath. The song had no composer, yet it moved toward harmony all the same. Even now, when we look at the world from above, from mountains, from airplanes, from the eyes of satellites, we can see the traces of that ancient movement. The shapes of the continents are frozen mid-dance, evidence of an ongoing performance billions of years in the making. The wind still flows across their surfaces, carrying echoes of that creation. Every breeze that brushes our skin, every storm that gathers on the horizon, is part of the same ancient current that once drifted over Pangaea. And so, the wind remains the keeper of Earth's memory. It has touched every mountain peak, every forest, every wave, and every desert dune. It has carried whispers from one continent to another, long before humans learned to speak across distance. The motion of land and the motion of air are forever intertwined, each shaping, cooling, and renewing the other. The continents may seem still, but beneath them, the earth continues to move, slowly, purposefully. In that slow motion, in that endless wind, the story of the planet continues to unfold, not in silence, but in rhythm. The continents are still breathing. The earth is still alive. And the wind, eternal witness to its every transformation, still sings the same ancient song of movement, balance, and becoming. When the seas found their rhythm, the world began to breathe again in rolling patterns too vast for any single moment to contain. The ancient winds, which had once sung through dust and silence, now met the open expanse of water and learned a new harmony. The air no longer wandered aimlessly, it had found its partner. Across those endless blue plains, it touched the surface of the ocean and felt its reflection, soft, mutable, alive. From that meeting was born the earth's first true music, a song of motion and depth, of wave and current, of air and water intertwined. The wind was no longer a solitary spirit. It had discovered resonance. The oceans answered in low, patient tones. Where the wind danced across the surface, the sea replied with ripples that grew into waves, long, breathing gestures that moved like the pulse of the world itself. The first storms rose out of this communion, immense and elegant, spiraling across thousands of miles. Lightning flashed within them like thought made visible, and thunder echoed back through the sky, reminding the wind of its own power. But unlike before, the wind did not seek to dominate. It learned to listen. It moved in cycles now, guided by temperature and tide, giving as much as it took. Every gust became a breath in the great respiration of the planet. Every calm became an exhale. Through this exchange, the world discovered balance, an unending dialogue of motion and rest, creation and return. As the wind swept across the new oceans, it learned the language of water. It carried mist and salt into the air, filling the sky with clouds, the first messengers between heaven and sea. From them came rain, falling endlessly upon the earth's surface, feeding the rivers that would carve their way through young stone. In that rain, the wind tasted memory. Every droplet had once been vapor, every vapor once ocean. The wind came to understand the cycle of life before life itself existed, that to move and return is the secret rhythm of endurance. It carried this lesson across the planet, touching mountain and plain, learning the texture of every surface it shaped. To the oceans, the wind was both sculptor and soul. It carved waves that broke upon unseen shores, polished stones beneath their surface, and whispered across miles of open water with a voice that could not be stilled. The seas responded in kind, their tides pulled by the invisible hand of the moon, their surfaces changing with every whisper of air. Over ages, their partnership grew inseparable. The wind gave the sea its breath, the sea gave the wind its body. Without one, the other could not sing. Together, they created a rhythm that carried through the ages, the earth's first duet, a conversation between movement and memory. Within this conversation, something extraordinary began. The wind carried minerals and carbon from the land into the water, and there, under the gaze of the sun, the building blocks of life began to stir. Simple molecules joined, split, and joined again, guided by the motion of air and current. The first fragile cells emerged, their existence balanced on the edge of chaos and calm. And though they had no ears, no voices, they were shaped by the same rhythm that moved the world, by vibration, by flow, by sound. The first life, in its most primitive form, danced to the song of the wind and sea. In time, the wind became a traveler, moving beyond the oceans to explore the young continents. It brought with it the scent of salt and the memory of waves. Over dry deserts, it sculpted dunes like waves of sand. Over forests, it carried spores and seeds, spreading green across the once barren land. Each journey added a new note to its melody, the rustle of leaves, the whisper of grasses, the soft hum of rain on soil. The planet's voice deepened, layer upon layer, as air and earth joined the conversation begun by air and water. The harmony between wind and ocean grew more complex. The air warmed, cooled, rose, and fell in vast cycles, shaping climates and seasons. The oceans responded, absorbing heat, releasing mist, guiding the air in return. Together, they wove the weather, storms, monsoons, trade winds, and gentle breezes, each a variation on the same ancient theme. Even now, every gust of wind that brushes the surface of the sea carries the history of this partnership. Each wave breaking on the shore is a line in the same song, still being written after billions of years. The human mind, when it finally arrived, would call this pattern beauty. It would listen to the sound of waves and name it peace. It would feel the wind against its face and call it freedom. But the truth is older and deeper than those words. It is connection. The wind and sea are not opposites, they are mirrors. One moves the other, one remembers the other, endlessly. The sound of the surf is the sound of the air returning home. The wind that sweeps over the ocean is the same that rises within our lungs. Every breath we take echoes that same timeless rhythm. In and out, rise and fall, the ancient pattern of air meeting water, motion meeting stillness. And though storms rage and oceans rise, the song endures. The wind has learned gentleness and power both. It knows when to roar and when to hush. It knows that even destruction is part of creation's rhythm, that after every storm comes calm, and after every calm, the stir of new motion. The sea, too, understands. Its depths are quiet not because they are empty, but because they are listening. Together, they sustain the world, one feeding the sky, the other cradling the land. If you stand by the ocean now, and let the wind move through you, you are standing in the oldest dialogue the earth has ever known. The same breath that lifts your hair once stirred the first waves, once whispered over waters untouched by light. The same molecules of air and vapor have circled the world countless times, carried across ages and continents, through storms and stillness alike. When you breathe in, you inhale a trace of that ancient exchange. When you exhale, you return it. That is the secret of the world's first voice. It was never lost, only transformed. The wind and sea still sing together, in every tide and every breeze, in every heartbeat that echoes their rhythm. The song has no beginning and no end. It is the memory of the planet itself, written in air and water, sung without words. And somewhere in that vast, eternal harmony, you are listening and breathing along. The rise of human civilization brought a new tone to the wind's eternal symphony. Where once it had sung to oceans and forests, it now brushed over the walls of cities, carrying the echoes of human thought, invention, and yearning. Villages became towns, towns grew into kingdoms, and kingdoms into empires, each radiating its own music, the clang of metal, the hum of markets, the murmur of language born from breath. Humanity had found its own voice, but unknowingly, it was still singing the old song, the song of air, vibration, and connection. Every spoken word was a ripple in the atmosphere, each exhale a continuation of the planet's first breath. The wind, now mingling with human sound, learned to carry not only nature's rhythm, but also the cadence of consciousness. For millennia, the wind had shaped the earth in silence, but now it shaped stories. It became a messenger between minds and moments, ferrying whispers across deserts, carrying the smell of rain toward waiting farmers, rustling the sails of explorers who followed it into the unknown. In every civilization, people listened. They called it by many names: spirit, breath, ruah, prana, pneuma, each a word for both air and soul. Ancient philosophers, gazing into the trembling air, sensed a truth that modern science would later confirm, that life and motion are bound by breath, that all beings are connected through invisible exchange. The wind that moved the trees was the same that filled their lungs. To breathe was to participate in the great conversation of the planet. But as the human voice grew louder, something subtle began to shift. The air, once filled with the delicate songs of natural rhythm, now carried the weight of industry and noise. The birth of machines brought new kinds of winds, the roaring gusts of steam, the hum of engines, the shriek of turbines cutting through the sky. The world trembled under the rising vibration of progress. Smoke curled into the atmosphere, mingling with the same ancient breath that had once moved freely through forests and oceans. The wind, though boundless, began to feel heavy. It carried more than dust now. It carried memory, heat, pollution, and the consequence of human fire. The planet's voice was changing, deepening into a complex harmony of creation and burden. Still, the wind did not rebel. It adjusted, adapted, and learned to sing in new keys. Over the factories and cities, it wove strange music, the resonance of chimneys, the rhythm of trains, the echo of footsteps on crowded streets. Even in this altered world, there was beauty. The sigh of wind between skyscrapers, the rustle of curtains at dusk, the long whistling over empty highways, all spoke of longing, of persistence, of an ancient melody reinterpreted through the noise of civilization. The wind had always been patient. It had survived the silence of ice and the roar of volcanoes. It would endure this new chapter too. For it understood what humans often forgot, that every era has its sound, and every sound carries meaning, even those born of chaos. Yet in rare, quiet moments, humanity still remembered the old harmony. A poet listening to the breeze through an open window, a sailor hearing the wind shift before a storm, a child chasing leaves across a field, all of them heard, for an instant, the original voice of the world. Across generations, we have spoken of the wind as if it were alive, as if it could listen. Perhaps it can. Perhaps it always has. For in every whisper of air that touches human skin, there is awareness, a reflection of our own breath returning to us. The wind moves through us, not around us. We are its instrument as much as its listener. Science eventually caught up to poetry. It discovered that the air we breathe is ancient, every molecule once part of countless lives before ours. Some of the oxygen in our lungs once belonged to dinosaurs, to trees long turned to stone, to the first creatures that ever dared to draw breath. Each inhale is a communion with the past, each exhale a gift to the future. In this sense, the wind is the planet's bloodstream, flowing through generations without end. And so, when humanity speaks, sings, or sighs, it does so through the same medium that once gave sound to the earth itself. Our words are the evolution of that first vibration, our music the flowering of an ancient resonance that began with the movement of air. But with progress came dissonance. Forests fell, oceans warmed, and the air began to fill with more than sound. It carried particles of our own making, the residue of speed and ambition. The wind, once clear and light, grew dense with the burden of civilization. Storms became harsher, climates shifted, and the voice of the earth turned strained, almost mournful. Yet even in this turmoil, there was a message. The planet was speaking to us again, asking to be remembered. The very atmosphere that nurtured our words was reminding us that it, too, had limits, that every exhale must eventually meet an inhale, every creation a rest. The balance of sound and silence that had once governed the world was faltering, calling for attention, for listening. And some began to listen again. Scientists studying the winds mapped their movement across the planet, discovering vast currents linking every continent, every life form. The air above one ocean became the air breathed by another species thousands of miles away. In this revelation, the ancient truth returned. All life is bound by breath. Philosophers and poets echoed this science in quieter ways, writing of interconnection, of unity, of the air as memory. And slowly, a new awareness began to emerge, that our survival, our peace, depends on restoring the harmony of that first song. The wind is not separate from us, it is our shared voice. The wind, for all its patience, remains the great equalizer. It moves freely through kingdoms and across borders, caring nothing for power or ownership. It speaks the same language to all, a universal whisper that erases difference and reminds us of belonging. When it moves through a ruined city or across a blooming forest, it carries no judgment. It only carries truth, that everything is connected, that nothing stands alone. The air we breathe in one corner of the world may have once been exhaled by another across the sea. Every moment of breath is collaboration. Every sound, every silence, is shared. In this realization lies both humility and hope. Humanity, for all its noise, is still part of the planet's great song. We are the wind, momentarily given shape and awareness. Our words, our art, our science, all are extensions of the same vibration that began in the dawn of time. And though we have changed the air, filled it with our inventions and our voices, we have not silenced its music. We cannot. For the wind's song is stronger than us, older, wiser, infinite. It carries not only what we say, but what we forget to say. It holds our mistakes and our beauty alike, and in time, it weaves them into harmony once more. So, when we listen to the wind now, whether howling through a canyon, sighing through the trees, or murmuring in the stillness of night, we are hearing the planet remember itself. We are hearing the fusion of all eras, all breaths, all beings that have ever existed. It is a chorus without beginning or end, and we are both audience and instrument. The story of humanity, then, is not separate from the wind's story. It is its continuation, the next verse in an endless song that began when the planet first learned to breathe. And perhaps that is the great reconciliation. The wind has learned the voices of forests, oceans, storms, and now us, creatures of thought and memory. It has listened to every age and carried every story. And though our era may be loud, filled with metal and electricity, the wind still moves with tenderness, seeking the spaces between our sounds. It reminds us, gently, that silence is not absence but balance, and that one day, long after we are gone, it will still sing, soft, eternal, and whole. For the wind never forgets. It remembers everything. It remembers us. There comes a moment, in every story of creation and rediscovery, when reflection turns inward, when the listener begins to understand that the voice they hear outside is not separate from the one within. Sound, after all, is not merely a phenomenon of the air. It is a meeting point between vibration and awareness. Without a listener, the world might hum forever in silence. It was in this realization that humanity began to perceive a deeper mystery, that hearing was not only a sense but a form of consciousness, a mirror through which the universe came to know itself. To listen is to awaken. Each sound that reaches the ear, whether the sigh of wind, the rustle of leaves, or the quiet beating of one's own heart, reminds us that we are participants in an ancient dialogue between energy and perception. The vibrations that ripple through the air do not end at the ear. They travel inward, stirring memory, emotion, and meaning. A single note can summon tears, joy, or peace, not because of what it is, but because of what it awakens within. Sound is the thread that ties the external world to the internal one, the bridge that unites matter and mind. As philosophers and scientists alike have long pondered, sound reveals the interdependence of existence. Every vibration implies movement, and every movement implies connection. The cry of a bird ripples through the forest. The forest responds with echo. The echo shapes the silence that follows. In this cycle lies a quiet revelation, that nothing sounds alone. Even in the most solitary note, there is relationship between the source, the space, and the listener. In this way, the act of listening becomes an act of unity, dissolving the illusion of separation between self and world. Modern research into sound and the brain illuminates this same truth in scientific language. Neuroscience has shown that the brain does not simply receive sound. It recreates it, translating vibration into perception. The patterns of air pressure are woven into electrical signals, and those signals are shaped by memory, emotion, and expectation. In essence, we do not hear reality as it is, we hear it as we are. The universe vibrates, but it is consciousness that gives those vibrations meaning, that transforms the indifferent hum of existence into the music of experience. This understanding transforms listening into a kind of meditation. When one listens deeply, not for words or melody, but for the texture of sound itself, something profound happens. The boundary between the listener and the sound begins to fade. The wind no longer seems like something passing by. It becomes part of one's breath. The ocean's rhythm aligns with the heartbeat. The hum of insects at dusk feels like the outer echo of inner stillness. In these moments, the listener realizes that the planet's voice and their own awareness are not separate. They are reflections of the same pulse, the same endless vibration that has traveled through everything since the dawn of time. Poets have always intuited this union. They write of rivers whispering secrets, of mountains singing in the night, of the earth dreaming through its creatures. Such language is not metaphor alone. It is a translation of feeling. When we listen with openness, the world does seem alive, speaking in a dialect beyond words. The rustle of trees becomes counsel, the song of a whale becomes prayer, and even silence begins to shimmer with meaning. Through deep listening, sound becomes sacred once more, a reminder that existence is not something we observe, but something we participate in. Yet, in the stillness of that awareness, another truth emerges. The song of the world is fleeting. Every vibration, no matter how beautiful, fades. A note resonates, expands, and dissolves into silence, just as waves rise and fall, as breath enters and leaves. Sound teaches impermanence, the art of release. To listen deeply is to practice letting go, to accept that beauty exists only in passing. Perhaps that is why certain melodies feel like memory itself. They remind us that everything we love is temporary, and yet eternal in its echo. Across cultures, this understanding has been carried through music, philosophy, and prayer. The Buddhist bell that fades into stillness, the Sufi spinning chant, the monk's Gregorian hum, all share the same intention, to attune the soul to impermanence and unity. the sound rises, fills the air, and returns to silence, mirroring the breath, the heartbeat, the cycle of life itself. In each, the listener hears both the presence and the absence, the sound and the space that gives it meaning. And so, to listen to the earth's voice is to listen to oneself. The wind that once learned to sing through stone and sea now moves through our lungs, shaping our thoughts into language, our emotions into song. Every sigh, every spoken word is the continuation of that first voice, the planet expressing itself through the consciousness it created. When we speak, it is the wind remembering. When we sing, it is the earth rejoicing. And when we listen, truly listen, it is the universe hearing itself once again. In this way, sound becomes revelation. It tells us that we are not separate from the song but woven within it, that the same vibration that stirs the air also stirs the soul. The listener and the world are two sides of one great resonance, endlessly reflecting each other in motion and silence. The wind's song has never ceased, it has only changed form. It now whispers through our breath, through our music, through the soft, conscious act of listening, reminding us that to hear is to exist, and to exist is to be part of the earth's eternal hymn. The age of ice was not merely a season of cold, it was a time when silence itself gained shape. Vast white continents stretched across the face of the planet, and the air was thin and crystalline, every breath a trace of the ancient past. The winds slowed but did not stop, they wandered through frozen valleys, carving new paths into the heart of stone. Beneath their touch, glaciers moved like living creatures, grinding mountains into dust over ages too long for human thought. The world seemed still, yet within that stillness, the wind found a new voice, softer, more reflective, born not from heat and storm, but from the delicate movement of snow across ice. It was a quiet song, a song of endurance, of waiting, of time folding inward. Across the frozen plains, where no leaf stirred and no wave rose, the air carried a purity unbroken by sound. In that near-perfect silence, the faintest whisper became sacred, the sigh of drifting snow, the creak of ice shifting under the sun, the low murmur of glaciers inching toward the sea. These were the wind's new instruments, and it played them with grace and patience. Every sound became a meditation on impermanence, on how even the hardest elements yield to time. The snowflakes, falling endlessly, were tiny messengers of balance, fragments of sky returning to the earth, carrying within them the same molecules that once danced in tropical storms. Beneath the ice, the world slept. Oceans slowed, forests vanished under frost, and many of Earth's voices fell silent. Yet the wind, ever faithful to motion, continued to travel, slipping through cracks in glaciers, winding through frozen canyons, whispering to the stars. It carried with it the memory of warmth, the echo of green worlds waiting to return. Deep within that cold silence, the planet began to dream again, of thawing rivers, of seeds buried beneath snow, of songs not yet sung. The wind was both the keeper of the past and the herald of renewal, carrying whispers of life across a world wrapped in sleep. For the creatures that survived, the wind became a lifeline. It brought the scent of distant oceans to the frozen tundra, guiding migrations across impossible distances. It carved patterns into snowdrifts that told stories of direction and change. Even in the harshest cold, it carried warmth, the faint remembrance of the sun, diffused through miles of frozen air. To the early animals that braved these epochs, the wind was both warning and comfort, a language of movement that spoke of survival. Its voice, though quieter now, remained unbroken, shaping not only the surface of the earth but the rhythm of all living things that endured. Scientists now know that even in this stillness, the planet was far from dormant. The Ice Age was a vast orchestra of subtle sound, the crack of glaciers calving into the sea, the deep groan of shifting continents, the hiss of ancient winds threading through valleys of ice. These sounds carried across the frozen world, faint yet constant, forming a symphony that only time itself could hear. Beneath the weight of snow, beneath the silence of cold, the earth continued to breathe. And in that breath, the wind rediscovered its patience, the slow, measured rhythm that would one day give rise to the pulse of life once more. When the ice began to melt, the world exhaled. Slowly, the oceans rose, carrying the echoes of millennia within their swelling tides. Rivers awoke, rushing through valleys that had lain still for tens of thousands of years. Forests began to return, tentative at first, moss, then grass, then trees. The wind, freed from its long constraint, became wild again, dancing over thawed earth and open seas. Yet it carried with it the wisdom of silence, the gentleness it had learned in the frozen age. It had known what it meant to move without sound, to sing without voice, to exist without being seen. And in that knowing, it had become something new, a balance between force and peace, movement and stillness. Philosophers would one day say that consciousness, too, is born from contrast, that awareness exists only because of silence, that understanding comes only after long quiet. The earth, in its own vast rhythm, lived this truth. The ice ages were not interruptions, but meditations, deep breaths in the cycle of planetary thought. The wind, that ancient voice, embodied this balance perfectly. It could roar or whisper, rage or soothe, destroy or heal, yet always it remained the same essence, the same current of being moving through all forms of time. Even as the ice retreated, traces of its song remained. The grooves etched into the mountains, the polished stones left behind by glaciers, the clear blue depths of ancient lakes, all of these were shaped by the patient music of frozen air. When the wind moved across them, it played the memories of that age like strings on a harp. The sound of wind through a mountain pass, the hush before a snowstorm, the sighing of the Arctic night, these are not just meteorological effects, they are echoes, fragments of the world's long meditation. In a sense, the earth learned something profound from its frozen silence, that even absence can sing. The wind carries that lesson still, moving gently across the poles, tracing circles of light and shadow across the ice. It hums softly over glaciers that have outlived empires, over snow that reflects the first light of every new dawn. In that cold brilliance, it remembers. It remembers the eons of quiet, the slow sculpting of valleys, the patience of a world that understands eternity not as endless motion, but as the perfect balance between movement and rest. And perhaps that is the true song of the wind, not the storms or the tempests, but the stillness between them. The Ice Age taught it that beauty can exist in restraint, that power can whisper, and that even silence, when held long enough, becomes music. The wind learned to listen to itself in those frozen centuries. And when the thaw finally came, its voice returned not as a cry, but as a hymn, calm, wise, and endlessly patient. It was no longer merely the voice of the planet's movement, it had become the voice of the planet's memory. Now, when we stand on a mountaintop or walk through falling snow, we are hearing that same ancient balance. The whisper of the wind across frozen fields is the echo of the world's quietest era, carried forward through time. It is a reminder that even in the coldest stillness, life waits. That silence, too, is part of creation. That the universe, vast and breathing, finds its truest rhythm not in chaos, but in the peace that follows. The ice once silenced the world, but it did not end it. It taught the wind a gentler song, one that would carry through every age that followed, singing softly, endlessly, beneath the turning stars. The story of the wind ends not with a conclusion, but with a return, a soft spiral back into the rhythm from which it first arose. Dawn is arriving, gentle and unhurried, spilling its pale gold light across the edges of the sleeping earth. In that still hour before awakening, when the air seems to shimmer with memory, the planet inhales once more. The first breath of morning moves through valleys and over rivers, brushing the tips of trees and the surfaces of lakes. The wind returns to its beginning, and in doing so, continues the eternal circle of its song. Every exhale of the world becomes another verse in the melody that began before time was counted. This is how the earth remembers itself, through breath, through sound, through motion. The atmosphere trembles softly, like the surface of water touched by a fingertip. It holds within it the entire history of vibration, the crack of lightning from the first storm, the murmur of ancient seas, the sighs of forgotten forests. Every current of air that moves today carries within it echoes of what once was. We breathe in the remnants of volcanoes, of lost rainforests, of the breath of creatures that vanished before our kind was born. In each inhalation lies a lineage older than memory. To breathe, then, is to participate in an inheritance, a sacred continuity between all forms of life. The air we draw into our lungs was once exhaled by something else, somewhere else, long ago. Perhaps it passed through the feathers of a prehistoric bird, or through the spiracles of a coral reef, or through the throat of an ancient human standing at the edge of an untouched forest. Now it enters us, becomes our breath, our voice, our thought. And when we exhale, it travels onward, joining again the chorus of existence. The air never truly belongs to anyone. It only visits, carrying stories wherever it goes. When we begin to sense this, something shifts in the mind. The illusion of separation begins to dissolve. We see that the atmosphere is not empty space around us, but a living bridge, a membrane connecting every being that has ever lived. The wind that moves through our lungs today once moved through the lungs of those who stood beneath other skies. The same air that now hums above cities once whispered through primeval jungles. The same currents that sweep across mountaintops once stirred the first oceans into motion. The planet's first voice has never stopped speaking. It simply changed languages, from the primal breath of creation to the whispered exhalations of consciousness. Science, in its precision, has confirmed what ancient mystics once intuited. Air is not a void, but a sea of invisible energy, dense with vibration. Within every cubic inch of atmosphere move billions of molecules, colliding, resonating, transferring motion endlessly. What we perceive as a breeze is the choreography of uncountable interactions, particles exchanging energy, sound waves rippling through their dance. Even in perfect stillness, there is movement. Even in silence, there is sound beyond the reach of our perception. Physicists call it background vibration, the quiet murmur of atoms never fully at rest. The ancients called it spirit, the eternal hum of being. To understand this is to glimpse the continuity between matter and consciousness. Every vibration, no matter how small, carries information. When air moves, it speaks. When it rests, it listens. And somewhere between those two states, between movement and stillness, arises awareness. The brain, too, is a landscape of waves. Neurons fire in rhythmic pulses, echoing the patterns of nature itself. The same oscillations that travel through air also dance within our skulls. Sound becomes thought, and thought becomes sound again. We are transmitters and receivers, part of a vast, self-listening universe. The philosophers of old described creation as a word, a sound spoken into the void. The scriptures of many traditions tell of that first utterance, the cosmic Om, the divine breath, the vibration that called light into being. Whether one sees it as metaphor or mystery, the meaning endures. Existence began with resonance. And perhaps it still continues that way. Each particle that vibrates today is a faint continuation of that original note. The universe still humming to itself, still singing the same infinite song. The wind, in this way, is not separate from the cosmos. It is the Earth's way of remembering the sound from which everything began. If we could listen deeply enough, perhaps we would hear that memory hidden beneath the noise of daily life. The rush of modern civilization, the hum of engines, the flicker of electricity, the pulse of machines, is only a new octave in the same universal composition. Even our technology, though often alienating, is part of the same pattern of vibration and rhythm. Every signal sent across the world, every radio wave, every heartbeat amplified through a stethoscope, all of it is vibration transformed, the wind's ancient language rearticulated in human form. But beyond the noise, beneath the endless patterns of our inventions, lies something quieter, older, and infinitely patient. It is the Earth's slow breathing, the rising and falling of pressure systems, the movements of air that carry moisture, heat, and life. This breathing is not random. It is a pulse, a rhythm that sustains the biosphere. It hums at a frequency so low that we do not hear it, yet we live within it. The entire planet vibrates at what scientists call the Schumann resonance, a natural electromagnetic frequency produced by lightning and the atmosphere itself. It oscillates around 8 cycles per second, a soft, deep tone that matches the human brain's rhythm in moments of calm reflection. The planet and our minds, in silence, move together. It is as if the earth has always been whispering in our own frequency, waiting for us to remember. The wind's first song, translated through the ages into science, music, and myth, is still present in that shared rhythm. When we sit in stillness and breathe with awareness, our body synchronizes with that pulse. Meditation, prayer, deep rest, all are ways of aligning the self with the planet's hum. We begin to sense not just peace, but belonging, the realization that our consciousness is not separate from the world, but a continuation of its vibration. In the vastness of night, when one listens without seeking, the boundaries begin to blur. The air becomes the voice, the listener becomes the echo, and the two dissolve into one another. It is here that the greatest lesson of the wind reveals itself, that existence is not divided between speaker and listener, between creation and observation. Everything is both, the universe listening to its own song through countless forms. The wind that once swept barren plains now passes through the strings of human thought, tuning them toward awareness. Every breath, every heartbeat, every whisper is the planet knowing itself through us. There is deep comfort in this. To live within the music of the world is to know that even when we fall silent, the song continues. Our lives are verses, brief and tender, sung for a moment and then carried onward by the air. The trees, the oceans, the atmosphere itself are the chorus that sustains us. The earth has never stopped singing, only we have sometimes forgotten how to listen. Yet even in forgetfulness, the song finds us. In the rustle of leaves, in the sigh of the wind through a window, in the quiet hum between thoughts, there it is again, the original melody, soft and eternal. The human heart responds to it instinctively. Studies have shown that the rhythm of wind and waves can slow the heartbeat, ease the mind, and evoke calm. But beyond the science lies something subtler, an emotional recognition, as if we are hearing a lullaby once sung to us in another age. The body remembers. The soul remembers. Every cell carries the imprint of sound, the resonance of the first breath that shaped matter into life. To listen deeply is to awaken that memory, to remember that we were never separate from the wind's song, we were born from it. And so, the story continues not outward, but inward. The wind that moves across mountains now moves through thought. The vibration that stirred oceans now stirs emotion. The song has entered us completely, so that when we speak, we are not creating new sound but extending the old. Each word is the wind remembering how to sing. Each sigh is the earth releasing itself through us. Every melody ever composed, every poem whispered to the night, is a translation of that same invisible current, the air finding new ways to express its love for existence. Yet the final lesson of the wind's journey is not one of motion, but of stillness. For every sound eventually returns to silence, and in that silence, it is not lost, it is fulfilled. The end of sound is not absence, it is rest, the return to the potential from which new notes will rise. The wind, after traveling across the world, settles. The day ends. The air grows still. And in that stillness, there is peace, the peace of knowing that everything continues, even when it no longer moves. The silence holds the memory of every song ever sung. It is not emptiness, but fullness beyond vibration. As the night deepens, imagine the earth sleeping, not unconscious, but in quiet awareness. The winds rest in the valleys, the oceans still their surface, and the forests breathe slow and steady. The atmosphere, for a moment, feels like a single held note, a pause between inhalation and exhalation. And in that pause lies eternity. The planet has learned to listen to itself. The wind, once a wild and restless spirit, has found harmony. Its journey from chaos to song, from sound to silence, mirrors our own evolution, the path from noise to awareness, from motion to meaning. The dawn returns as it always does. The first light falls on the world, and the air stirs once more. But something has changed, not in the wind, but in the listener. We now hear differently. What once seemed like mere weather, mere breeze, now feels like presence, the continuation of a story older than stars. Every whisper of air against the skin feels sacred, every sigh a reminder of connection. The world breathes and we breathe with it. The song and the listener are one. And so, the wind's final message is simple, yet infinite. Everything sings, and everything listens. The song that began when the planet first learned to move still resonates in every atom, every heart, every breath. To hear it is to awaken to belonging. To live it is to move gently, to speak softly, to carry forward the harmony of existence. When the wind learned to sing, it did not end its lesson, it began ours. The story closes not with silence, but with an invitation, to listen, not for words, but for wonder. To breathe with awareness. To hear, in every sound and every pause, the endless continuation of creation. The universe hums, the earth sings, and through us, the wind remembers. Its song, once scattered across the surface of a young world, now flows through consciousness itself. It has found its home in the quiet spaces between our thoughts, in the slow rhythm of our hearts, in the infinite patience of time. The wind learned to sing, and in learning, it gave the universe a voice. That voice became the song of the earth, the whisper of life, the murmur of stars, and the hush of sleep. It became us. And now, as we listen, as we drift into the calm beyond words, the song continues, vast, gentle, eternal, carrying the memory of everything that has ever been into everything that will ever be.